Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. I remember when I first started playing chess again, almost a year ago. As a beginner, I didn't have any real tactical or strategic sense regarding how best to play. Today, I played a 10-minute game with an opponent on chess.com who had left a comment in one of my articles on my blog. They had just started their account and is rated at around 500 in rapid chess. I've made all the errors they've made before in this game, and I didn't play perfectly either. Analysing this game identifies some tips that might be helpful for beginner players. Please enjoy! So let's have a quick look at the review first. So chess.com's algorithm. So unsurprisingly, given that my new friend Cheesy Taco is quite a bit lower rated than myself, that I did relatively well in this game. Accuracy of about 92%. And mostly, fairly good moves. And it's generally easy to get good moves when the opponent makes some errors in their moves. But, my friend did pretty well, 76.6% accuracy, which is pretty good at a level of 500. Some pretty good moves, but, some inaccuracies and early blunder, which made the difference, I think, in the game. Let's move on now to the analysis, just to have a look at this game in detail. Alrighty, so in this game, I played the Vienna. So e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6. And, this is generally a sort of good sort of idea, playing e5 to e4 and also developing your knight before bishops, trying to control the center. So these are all sort of good moves. Now the Vienna Gambit is f4, and one of the things to know about the Vienna Gambit is that you should not accept the gambit. That is bad for black to do so. Now my opponent followed that sort of basic principle and developed the other knight to c6. Now, generally, developing knights, not engaging in gambits you're not familiar with, these are good ideas. Now, the one thing to know, I think, about the Vienna Gambit is that there is only one good response, which is d5, which is what's recommended by Stockfish. In fact, that is the only good move. And black is, in fact, very slightly ahead if they play d5. As we'll see, this actually ends up not being a good move for black, +2 for white. And this is one specific thing to know about the Vienna Gambit. You just have to play d5. There are no other good moves. And potentially quite a good gambit to play as white because it is so forcing. And the fact that d5 is not probably the most natural move here. Pawn captures pawn with an attack on the knight. The best move is knight captures pawn, which my opponent played. This, however, allows for d4, now with an attack on the knight. But that's one of the best moves. So you can retreat the knight to either of those positions. Either is fine. And then the next move is e5, now with an attack on the knight. Now, in this position, there is only one good move for black. So all the escape squares are covered by my knight and my queen. And so the only good move for the knight on f6 is to retreat, undevelop, back to g8. Now, one of the things that can be hard psychologically is to undevelop a piece, to retreat a piece in that way. And I think this was the bias that my opponent had as a beginner, and they sort of lashed out with sort of capturing a piece, and that's the blunder, almost +7 here for white. And fundamentally, undeveloping is not good, but straight up losing a piece is worse. And the capture of that piece, now there's sort of a chained attack on that other knight. Again, the opportunity here is to undevelop to g8. However, error compounded error, to trying to keep the piece on the board. Maybe didn't see that square was covered by the queen, and so unfortunately that second knight was lost. And already here I'm in a completely winning position by move 8. Opponent plays g6, which is excellent, no threatening the queen, forcing the queen to move out of the way. So I moved back to f3 in this, so queen f3 in this situation, potentially sort of my goal was to bring the bishop out to c4 on the next move, lining up for a potential mate in one, no scholar's mate. Now the opponent played a queen h4, which comes with check. Now that potentially can be a sort of good move, and checks are forcing moves. However, in this case, it's fairly easily blocked with g3, and obviously queen cannot capture. And there is nothing on this rank that the queen can capture. The opponent sort of retreats the queen to h5, so inviting a queen trade. Now, in this position, there is no need really for me to capture their queen. I can use that move to develop another piece, simply because if they do capture my queen, which presumably was the logic of moving queen to h5, that simply allows me an extra turn developing a piece, developing my other knight. So here I developed bishop to c4, basically threatening a very, very powerful move. Now, Stockfish here suggested playing queen f6, which is probably the best move, with a sort of a threat on the rook, and also protecting the pawn, which is potentially under attack by the queen. However, I suspected my opponent wasn't going to capture my pawn. I suspected they were going to do a queen trade, and that's what they did. And of course, that actually just allows me to now develop my other knight, now also in addition supporting the pawn on e5. So I'm relatively doing very well, basically plus 11, so completely winning in this position. A6, so the logic here, I think, is to play b5, with an attack on the bishop, along with a queenside expansion. So that's a reasonably good move. However, it's a move that fairly easily countered by playing a4, which is what I did in this position. Opponent now plays c6, and I think their logic was, now that they had an extra defender on the b5 square, that they could then attack the bishop, maybe forking the bishop and the pawn. However, it's important to actually project and count what's actually going to occur, because let's say I capture, they capture back. I can then capture back with either bishop or knight. They actually cannot capture back with the a6 pawn, because it will then be pinned to their rook. So I suspected that this was probably a tactical error by my opponent. So developed my other bishop here, thinking that I would either short or long castles next, and I would have an option here. I was thinking potentially of long castles, given that I've sort of lost some of the defense around the king on the king side. Yep, so they played b5, and this plays out. So captures, 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 cannot capture back because it is pinned to the rook. And this is a pattern that's important to recognize. Developing bishop, so not a bad move. So here I decided to potentially fork, the king and the bishop. So in this position, given that I'm materially up, my goal is to try to force piece trades. The more pieces I force to get traded off, the easier it is for me to basically win. So move towards a winning endgame. So with check, I was actually expecting them to capture with bishop and to take back. And the reason that is a mistake, there's a mate in 2 here. Now, I have to admit, I didn't see the mate in 2. But where that mate in 2 lies is bishop to g5. Now, the king basically can't escape here because it's covered by the bishop, can't escape there, covered by the knight, Can't capture the knight because it's covered by the pawn. Can't come here, no, covered by the bishop and the pawn. Can't come here because it's covered by that bishop. So the only possible move is moving the pawn to f6, and then that would be checkmate. Now, I have to admit, I'm not very good at seeing checkmates in the middle of the board like that. So I absolutely did not see that. And my goal here was, in fact, just to capture that bishop. So that's what I did. Now king now moves back. And now with that square protected, I can capture with the rook. Here, the rook should move out of the way. You don't want to trade pieces. You're down on material. You don't want to trade pieces. But a very common, I think, bias for beginners is to trade pieces when invited. But this is actually good for me because that's actually what I want as a person up on material, to trade off the pieces. So now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 minor pieces, still have one rook, and there's only one bishop, one rook left. So it is increasingly easy for me to win as I trade off the pieces, as the absolute difference in material becomes proportionately much more significant as there's fewer and fewer pieces left on the board. Check. Sure. However, here, I could have blocked with the pawn, but because I had a sense that my opponent had a bias where they wanted to trade pieces, again, I'm happy to trade pieces. Captures, captures. Now there's only the rook left. Here, I trade, bring my other rook into the game. That's fine. Move my sort of my knight out of sort of a fairly awkward position, captured. So to that position, protected by the knight. King goes down. Now obviously I want to potentially protect that pawn from capture. So knight to that position. The rook makes an attack on the bishop, so that's pretty good. So I move the bishop out of the way, down, check, yep, that's fine. Move the king out of the way. And here, potentially, I had another sort of mating sort of idea, which, again, I didn't see in this game. I'm not so good with sort of checkmates in the middle of the board, which is trying to get the rook into that position because in that position, the king has no escape square. Can't move here, can't capture here, can't go there because it's protected by the knight. Can't go here, protected by the pawn. Can't go in that position, protected by the knight. And if the rook is here, obviously that would be checkmate. So that was potentially a checkmate net, but I didn't really see that. Opponent play that move. And here, again, I was reminded that the opponent was very, very obliging in trading pieces when there were sort of equal trade. So I decided to basically just to whack that last rook, basically. So I moved my king back to g2. I expected they would capture the pawn, which is what they did. And then rook f2, basically inviting a trade. And again, they obliged. So again, this is a mistake. You don't want to trade off your material. And here I've got 3 minor pieces left. It's pretty difficult for me to lose in this position. Now, when I sort of communicated with my opponent afterwards, they were actually trying to aim for a stalemate, which is good because stalemate is a draw. A draw is a draw. It is a tie. It doesn't matter how much material I have. If they can get a draw, basically, given that they're so much lower in rating, they will get quite a lot of points from a draw. So that's absolutely the thing that they should be trying to do. Here, I decided to move my bishop out of the way. From my perspective, my goal, rather than trying to work out how to checkmate with knights and bishops, it's all complicated. I thought I'm just going to try to promote one of my pawns. Yep, pushing a pawn, that's fairly reasonable. Push my pawn forward there. Yep, so this is a good idea because this is potentially a position where if I am not careful, the opponent, they could lead to a stalemate. And I actually saw stalemate was a potential problem for me. So they moved here. So obviously that pawn can't move. If they move that pawn forward, that can't move. That pawn can't move forward. So I'm in a position where I could be in some trouble. That I could be at risk of creating stalemate. So I decided to move that knight out of the way. Now clearly, this king is now completely trapped in position. Can't go here because of the pawn. Can't go here because of the knight. So all I need is one other piece to cause to create a check, and then it's end of the game. And by moving my knight out of the way, this pawn will always have a number of moves available. So capture, that's fine. Yep, they're forced to move their pawn. And, I don't really care about that because 1, 2, 3 to queen or rook, and then it's checkmate. So move that forward, and checkmate. So great game for the opponent. GG. So tips and ideas in order of issues that occurred in this game. Generally, it's a good idea to not accept a gambit that you're not familiar with, and my opponent correctly did not accept the Vienna Gambit, and instead prioritized the developing of their pieces. That's a good general strategy. In the case of the Vienna Gambit, it's tricky as the only good response is d5, which isn't a natural looking move. This is something to just remember for next time. The next tip is to remember that pieces like knights can go backwards. Undeveloping isn't good, but losing a piece is even worse. Over the space of 2 moves, my opponent lost both their knights, something that could have been avoided by retreating the first knight rather than lashing out. The loss of the second knight might have been due to not seeing the long diagonal controlled by my queen. I remember that as a beginner, I often lost pieces from bishops due to blindness to diagonals, especially from afar. It can be good practice, if you know this is a bias, to consciously observe where the opponent's bishops and queen are located, and even use the arrow tools on chess.com to mark out the diagonals they cover. The next tip is that when you are behind on material, don't initiate balanced piece trades. That's actually what the opponent wants to do strategically, and you're just helping them. My opponent initiated an early queen trade, which made it easier for me to win. Later in the game, my opponent always obliged with offers of trading pieces. First the rook, then the bishop, and then the final rook. This left me in an endgame up 3 minor pieces. When behind on material, try to consolidate your position and hold onto your material. If possible, see whether you can force the opponent to trade their pieces for your pawns, helping equalize the material. I'd like to thank my opponent for entering this game, even though they were rated quite a bit below me. As before, I think they played well overall, and even had the clever plan towards the end to see whether they could force a stalemate. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.